Hello, and welcome to IQ Interview. My name is Denis Sokolov, and I'm partner at Cushman Wakefield and chairman of ULI Russia. And today we have a very, very special guest, Lisette van Doorn, a CEO of Urban Land Institute Europe. Lisette, hello.
Hello, Denis. Good morning.
How are you doing? Where are you now? Because it's always difficult, when you do all this teleconferencing, you can never expect where people are connecting from.
I'm connecting from Amsterdam. I live in the Netherlands.
Yeah, and so what is happening currently in Amsterdam, in Netherlands, due to this pandemic situation, lockdowns? Just a couple of words. How is there?
Well, I think it's tough at the moment. We're in sort of a lockdown again. Netherlands has never been in a full lockdown. They've always kept shops open, encouraged people to work from home. That was the situation before spring. Then it went down massively over the summer. It went quite well. And then, say, back in September, it started to increase again quite dramatically. So now children are at school. And for them, it's close to business as usual, I would say. They don't need to respect social distancing, but everyone is encouraged to work from home. And restaurants are closed, bars are closed, shops are open. So the country tries to deal with it, but measures sometimes feel quite inconsistent. But I guess that's the case in many other countries as well. The number of infections doesn't decrease as much as they would like to. And now, of course, December is a tough month. We just celebrated Sinterklaas, which is basically our Christmas giving. That's always on the 5th of December in the Netherlands, with gifts, families coming together. So that's been tough. And now everyone's trying to get ready for Christmas. Actually, this evening, there's another press conference from the Prime Minister, and we'll probably hear what's going to happen or not happen until the Christmas period and probably early January.
Thank you very much. It's always good to hear that not only your country is inconsistent in measures, because we always think that everywhere else is okay, but only in our countries things are going wrong.
Exactly.
No, we understand that everyone is in the same boat. So, regarding ULI, how ULI as an institution is coping with pandemic? Because Urban Land Institute is always kind of an agent of change, an agent of transformation. So is ULI transforming now, or is leading transformation? How is it going on?
Well, we had to. We're a global member organization with over 45,000 members active in real estate and urban development from all across the world. An important reason for people to become members is networking. And we used to do that in a physical setting. Only in Europe, we already organize more than 200 events a year, from very local roundtables to our biggest event of the year, which attracted over 700 people. That happened straight before the pandemic escalated in early February. So we were kind of lucky with that. But then from mid-March, we had to cancel all our physical events. And we had to move to digital, as everyone else did at the same moment. We managed to do that in 2 weeks' time. I must add that before the pandemic, we only had tested that 2 or 3 times. So it was quite a drastic move. And of course, as with any other company, we had to send people home, work from home constantly. I'm proud of how fast and how smooth, I think, we made that transition to digital. Of course, at that time, we only thought it would be temporary. But also in the meantime, we got a lot of positive feedback. We immediately thought in what is unique about ULI. So what should we incorporate in that digital program that other organizations can't do? And we thought that would be our global footprint, as well as the multidisciplinary focus of ULI. And that's what we consistently applied in every webinar we did, initially on a weekly basis. And after summer, we transitioned that to bi-weekly because we noticed that people were busier again, hybrid models were developing, etc. And that has been, we've received a lot of positive feedback on that, because suddenly from at your doorstep, you have access to the leadership in China, in the Americas, etc., and you don't have to travel for that anymore. So it has had a big impact for ULI. And of course, people have become much more conscious about costs they spend, expenses, what is the value of these type of memberships. But so far, we've really received positive feedback from members, appreciating what we've delivered, and also very positive feedback on our research, and a lot of interest, especially from our corporate members, to participate in that. So it seems to be far more about the content that's being produced.
Yeah, you're right, absolutely. Because I wonder how much time we would spend agreeing on on such an interview in pre-COVID era. Now we have just simply you can simply really access thought leaders from all parts of the world. It's really amazing. So let's now talk about emerging trends in real estate. That's one of my personal favorite reports from ULI, because especially in Russia and other emerging markets, it's really important for us some global perspective to understand what is the position of our markets. But can you, from your point of view, describe this report and what it's all about? Because I'm sure some people who will be listening this podcast have not seen that report yet.
It's a report that ULI produces on an annual basis together with PwC. It's actually 3 reports, one for the Americas, one for Europe, and one for Asia Pacific. It comes out at the end of the year, so we published the European one early November, and it focuses on the coming year. And it surveys a large proportion of the real estate industry in a specific region on what their outlook is for the coming year. In Europe, we were very proud to have almost 1,000 people, that was a record, contributing to the report, either through responding to a survey, participating in an interview, or participating in local roundtables, which we held, which stimulated also the discussion between people. So we really try to capture, obviously it's just a photo shoot almost from one moment in time, but it's really helpful to see what is the general view about what are the challenges and also the opportunities in real estate with cities for the coming year.
Thank you very much, Lisette. And what is regarding this report, this edition? What's the most important points do you see? Our kind of outcomes of the latest edition of this report?
Well, obviously there's a lot going on at the moment, and I think the most important thing is that there's so much change at the moment, and of course the pandemic pushed us into a cyclical downturn. But at the same time, the pandemic has also been an agent for change, for structural change, accelerating many trends we already saw happening, but on a much slower pace. And suddenly, I spoke to people who said, well, we've just had 5 years of change just in 6 months' time, in terms of working, shopping, and many things related to real estate and how we live, health and well-being, the impact of technology. And that is a lot to deal with at one moment, especially in an environment where there's a lot of uncertainty around the economic outlook, what it means for businesses in terms of profitability, headcount, and confidence. And at the same time, how do you then apply and position yourself towards those bigger trends, and how do you profit from that? So it's really the uncertainty that plays a big role on many different fronts.
You mentioned that pandemic sent markets to cyclical change. So it's it's interesting. I think very important point. So basically, that suggests that we will be on the downturn cycle for quite a few years. So even if, let's say, if COVID, if pandemic if world will recover from pandemic, still we will stay. Real estate will stay on the cyclical downturn. So can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, what I should say is there's a lot of disagreement, or lack of agreement is probably a better word, on how long that downturn is going to stay with us. And of course, that depends to a large extent on how long governments will continue to support economies, employees' wages, businesses, especially in the sectors that were hit hardest. And that uncertainty, but I think many people expect that things might get worse, especially also now that across Europe, banks haven't really exercised any government breaches, etc. We hear a lot about waivers, understanding, and all of that. And at some point, you would think that the distress needs to come out. But it's not clear yet. We couldn't get to a common view on how long people expect that to be. What you do hear is that people are, concerned about that, and that's really something that plays a big role. To give you an idea, 90% of respondents think that business confidence and profitability will be significantly lower next year than it was before. And if you look at that in a longer term historical overview, those confidence levels lie at the same level as in 2011. Well, also at that time, the worst still had to come. We didn't know that at the time, but there was still more to come. And that's what many people expect now. Of course, what you do see is that it's very unevenly distributed now. Some sectors, if you look at the real estate, for example, some sectors are doing really well, others are performing extremely poor. So that recovery will also the downturn will be not the same for everyone, and the recovery will not be the same for everyone.
Yeah, you mentioned that everything will not be the same for everyone. Can you kind of point your finger at, let's say, at some markets that can perform better or maybe worse? So some really markets to watch. I'm talking about geographies. I'm talking about sectors. I'm talking about, let's say, even projects aimed at certain focus groups, genders, something like that.
Certainly. Well, if we start with sectors, there's a huge focus on everything, on all sectors that have something to do with technology. Last year, you may remember, everything was focused on residential. 6 out of the top 10 sectors that were most preferred in terms of investment and development opportunities had something to do with residential. Now it's all about technology. It's about data centers, communication communication towers, logistics, of course, and even new energy infrastructure is being highly sought after. Of course, some of those sectors are still very small in terms of actual deal flow that's happening, but we see a lot of interest, also life sciences. So that pandemic has really almost put the sector preferences on its head. And if we then, all the traditional sectors almost, like retail, offices, come really at the bottom of the list. And then there is still interest for residential. Obviously, people need to live. There's much more focus on quality of life and quality of the residence, especially if you also have to work there and not only live there. So that's definitely what we see. Those residential sectors that are more focused on physical interaction, like student housing, co-living, seem to be a bit uncertain because people really don't know yet how that's going to play out. And if we then look at cities, generally the idea is really risk off, not surprisingly. That's also what we saw in the sector preferences. And the last couple of years, we already saw that trend happening in geographic allocation, where people thought we're heading towards the end of the cycle, don't exactly know how long this is going to take. We don't see the black swan coming, but we know one day it will. So let's prepare us for some defensive investments. That really favored German cities. And guess what? It's still all about German cities. Out of the top 7 cities, 4 are German, the biggest German cities. Berlin is on the number 1 position. And that is because German cities are generally perceived as low risk, but also because Germany is thought of having managed the pandemic among the better countries, I would say. And what I think is also playing a role, and we've seen that, of course, the pandemic has hugely interrupted how you could do business. We weren't able to travel physically anymore. And we are used to inspecting a building before we want to buy it, or meeting with investors before we want to kind of allow them in the funds that we manage. Of course, that's not possible. But in a bigger country where many investors or managers have foot on the ground and teams on the ground, it is easier to keep the business going, especially if the circumstances are quite okay. And that's why we saw also deal flow in Germany in the past year, kind of staying up to an acceptable level, especially in comparison to other countries. So we do think that that's also playing a role. And then if we look at further across the top 10, we see the quite somewhat surprising, the biggest cities, Paris and London at number 2, Paris at number 3. And that seems somewhat contradictory, because what we hear a lot is that those mega cities might recover much slower from the pandemic than smaller, say, more human-sized cities, mostly because of the high office density they have, and also the huge dependence on public transport that everybody wants to avoid at the moment. But what is, in the case of London, it's really about not having been of interest for quite some time, given all the uncertainty around Brexit, that it feels like the pricing has adjusted such that for a long-term perspective and opportunity, it is definitely interesting to go back in. And that's what many people say. Everyone's convinced about London's long-term strengths. And with Paris, it's really about all the investments that are taking place. It's the Grand Paris infrastructure project. It's the Olympics that are coming. Mayor Hidalgo is strongly focusing on the 15-minute city, almost trying to overcome the negative elements of a mega city. And that's receiving a lot of interest from investors and managers. And then we have a group of cities which I would call medium-sized, smaller. Among those, Amsterdam, Dublin, Vienna, Milan, not that small, but also not that huge, where you seem to have much more human scale, a diverse set of opportunities in the different sectors, many investing heavily in quality of life, active transport, really trying to attract talent, and through that also businesses.
Thank you very much, Lisette. That's a really wonderful short overview. As a kind of, I had a feeling that I'm flying over Europe, looking at different cities and just understanding what is happening. It's really amazing. Now I have a couple of personal questions. I know that people, there are 2 types of people I talk to. Some of them say, okay, world is not going to be the same anymore, and other people say, no, nothing is changing. 10,000 years of human civilization didn't change a bit in the way people live and cities evolve. So who are you on that scale?
I'm definitely not in the camp that nothing will change. But I also don't think that everything will be different. Probably I'm in the middle, if that's allowed, where I do think, if I look at myself, for example, I live in the Netherlands. I used to work in London. Well, obviously I still work in London, but not physically at the moment. Um, I think that travel will be less than before. Because we are learning now that it's so convenient to also do a lot through video, or even speaking slots. You don't have to travel anywhere anymore. So I do think certain things will change. It seems a bit like the excesses we had built up after the financial crisis, where everything was about physical interaction. There were no limits to international travel. It seems also almost like with this pandemic, it was a hard stop we had to make. We saw the impact, for example, also on our environment, on climate, on carbon emissions, etc. And I hope we can go back, keeping that into account when we don't have to anymore. And the other point I would make is about a social value and kind of the role the industry has in not only making a short-term financial return, but also a long-term contribution to society. And I'm totally convinced that that will also help returns over the long term. So it's definitely not at the cost of, it's a combination, but it requires a change in mindset that it seems to happen, but it's still hard to execute and implement given data is limited and we don't have the proof yet. And how do you measure those different impacts and all of that?
That's actually a great point, and I think platforms and institutions like ULI are now playing a key role in keeping this social, professional interaction that we're lacking in with the with the elimination of all those travels and conferences and so on. And the last question is about yourself. Do you feel confident in what is going to happen next year, in what will be happening? Or you think I'm not asking what you see for next year, that's another story, but do you feel kind of, as a person who is always looking a little bit forward, do you feel confidence, or you still think that we are in undefined territory?
I want to start with saying I'm not a pessimist, not at all. I like to see the opportunities, but I don't think 2021 will be an easy year. I think, given what we talked about before, the economic impact that still might need to come through, the time it might take before majorities of populations are being vaccinated, I think that will take time. So our physical movement might still be somewhat restricted. What I do think is that what I saw, say, 6 months ago was everyone was in a wait and see mode. Let's not do anything. This is going to be over by summer. So we don't support, as an organization, we saw our membership decreasing somewhat. That's been compensated now, because I think now people realize, like, okay, this is the situation we're in. Let's make the best of it and keep going. We can't just sit on our hands for another year. So I do think that people start, within the constraints there are, people start to move, and we see that already, and keep doing that. So I do think that there are definitely opportunities. And for an organization like ULI, I think we kind of, the point I made before is making change that normally would take a couple of years now in a few months' time. That really applied to us as well, in how we embedded digital in our offering. And some of that is definitely going to stay, because it fulfills a demand that we didn't fulfill before. and you can't fulfill with physical events, or so it's more the combination of that. So I am cautiously optimistic, I would say, on 2021, but I think it will be in a constrained setting.
Thank you very much, Lisette, especially for such a kind of such in-depth overview and optimistic conclusion. Dear colleagues, that was Lisette van Doorn, head of ULI, CEO of ULI EMEA. And thank you very much, Lisette, for your time, for your participation in this podcast. And I hope sometime later we can talk again.
Thanks, Dennis. You're
Thank you
welcome.
very much,
I
Lisette.
appreciated it. Bye.
Goodbye.